Right now, Iran is launching massive strikes on American military bases in Bahrain and Kuwait. After the United States of America carried out a series of military strikes against Iran in response to the shelling of tankers in the Hormuz Strait by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Middle East has once again plunged into war, and the price of oil on the world market has started to rise rapidly again. U.S. President Donald Trump officially announced today the end of negotiations with Iran and accordingly the end of the ceasefire. Later, he stated that the Iranian leadership is incapable of engaging in constructive negotiations and called for the elimination of the entire Iranian top leadership. In response, Iran announced that it is completely withdrawing from negotiations with the U.S. and will never return to them, calling on the people for total war. Trump resumed the blockade of Iran, lifted the sanctions, and did not rule out the capture of the key Iranian island of Khark. In response, the Iranians said that if American soldiers come, that's where they will stay. But later, Trump added that for now, he does not plan a ground military operation. At the same time, Trump stated that he plans to quickly deal with Iran in some way so that he can negotiate with other people. And a prolonged war, or rather a resumption of it. He does not see or plan for a prolonged war at this time. Meanwhile, the Hormuz Strait is blocked again and regional leaders are calling for a new ceasefire. And Trump says that the rise in oil prices doesn't bother him much because, as he says, after every such attack, oil prices go up. So, he says we need to worry about it every time. Let's figure out together what's happening in the Middle East right now. My name is Alexei Pecci, and before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and leave any comment on this video. Subscribe. So, both sides, the US and Iran, have officially announced the breakdown of the ceasefire and their withdrawal from any negotiations. On the morning of July 8, after a series of US strikes on Iran, Donald Trump stated that the ceasefire with Iran is no longer in effect, and the Memorandum of Understanding, as he put it, is over. Next is a quote from Trump. For me, I think it's over. I don't want to deal with them anymore. They're scum. They're run by sick people. It's just a waste of time. Dealing with them, there's something wrong with them. We say, go and take care of your funeral business, but instead yesterday they started firing rockets at ships. So we hit them very hard last night. But when Trump talks about funeral business, he means that right now the Iranians are saying goodbye to their leader, Ali Khamenei. According to the American military, the US struck more than 80 Iranian targets in order to weaken their capabilities. Tehran's ability to continue attacks on shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. The strikes targeted 60 boats of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, as well as air defense systems, command and control networks, coastal radar facilities, and anti-ship missile positions. Although, let me remind you, Trump has long claimed that the Iranians don't have any of this. As this episode is being recorded, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps reports it is conducting strikes on American military facilities in Bahrain and Kuwait, after the US carried out a series of military strikes on Iran in response to the attacks on tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. In the two Arab states, that is, in Kuwait and Bahrain, air raid sirens were heard. The Kuwaiti army reported that its air defense forces are repelling an enemy missile and drone attack. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran stated that it launched the missiles and drones at the American naval base in Bahrain and the Ali al-Salem air base in Kuwait. IRGC forces also shot down an American MQ-9 drone that was involved in repelling this strike, and now an image of this downed American drone are already being published on social media. As reported by Iran's Fars news agency, quote, as an initial response to the actions of the United States, the naval and aerospace forces of the IRGC struck 85 American military targets with drones and missiles in Port Salman, the 5th Naval District of Bahrain, and at Ali al-Salem Air Base in Kuwait. A few hours before that, Washington, as you know, revoked the temporary sanctions relief that allowed Iran to export oil, and carried out military strikes on targets in Iran in response to the shelling of ships in the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. Department of the Treasury revoked the general license that allowed transactions involving Iranian oil after this series of attacks. As stated by the agency, Tehran's actions were completely unacceptable and will have consequences. Here's a quote: "Iran will only benefit if it behaves properly." And now the U.S. Treasury Department has stated that all previously concluded deals with Iranian oil must be completed by July 17th. The signing of new contracts is prohibited starting July 7th. This means that Iran will once again be unable to legally trade oil. Let me remind you, the license was issued on June 22nd. It covered the production, supply, sale, and unloading of Iranian oil, petroleum products, and petrochemical products, and was supposed to be valid until August 21st. Authorization for Iranian oil exports was one of the points in the memorandum between the US and Iran on conflict resolution signed in June. The revocation of the export license was preceded by attacks on tankers in and near the Hormuz Strait. According to the British Maritime Trade Operations Centre, in recent days 3 commercial vessels have reported damage as a result of being hit by unidentified projectiles. Among the attacked vessels were tankers from Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and both countries placed the responsibility specifically on Iran. On Tuesday, July 7, the Combined Maritime Forces, a US-led naval group in Bahrain, raised the threat level in the Strait to serious. Iran's chief negotiator, Mohammad Bakr Ghalibaf, immediately accused the US of violating the ceasefire agreement. Although it was the Iranians who first attacked the tankers in the Hormuz Strait, which tried to pass through the strait along the Omani coast. The United States Central Command reported the destruction of more than 60 IRGC boats in response to this. And before that, explosions occurred at Iran's main oil terminal on Khark Island on Keshem Island, as well as in the southern port cities of Sirik and Bandar Abbas. Interestingly, in the initial report from the U.S. Central Command, Khark Island, from which Iran exports 90% of its oil, was not mentioned. But later, Donald Trump suggested that the U.S. might even seize this Iranian island, Khark. He added that he did give the order last night to attack Khark, but he forbade the Air Force from attacking the oil storage facility, since he is considering the possibility of seizing the island along with all its oil. Here is a quote from Trump. Here is the quote: "We will take Khark Island and there is nothing Iran can do about it. So I said, don't hit the pipelines, hit everything else." But, in fact, later, Donald Trump added that he is not planning any ground military operation for now, but instead, some kind of operation is being prepared that will quickly put an end to the regime in Tehran. Quote, "These are evil, sick people, and we need to get rid of them like we'd get rid of cancer. And do you know what needs to be done? You need to cut out the cancer at an early stage." But despite the fact that both sides have supposedly said they've pulled out of the negotiations, it's still completely unclear what this will look like in practice. So whether the negotiations will continue or not is unclear. But Trump, who last month warned of an economic catastrophe if the war continues, is still under the same political pressure to end this war, so he can't resume it. In one of our previous episodes, we discussed the fact that the war isn't in Trump's interest at all right now. He will have big problems if the war resumes. The US and Iran have already exchanged strikes. Iran attacked commercial ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz. The US delivered retaliatory strikes on Iranian military targets. In response, Iran struck Bahrain and Kuwait. These attacks led to a sharp rise in oil prices. They haven't announced the end of negotiations. There have been exchanges, but they haven't said there will be no more negotiations. But here Trump resorted to a trick. He suddenly stated, almost in passing, that he would allow his negotiators to continue working on a broader nuclear agreement with Iran, but he called this a waste of time. And here you need to listen carefully to his quote. On one hand, he says, "That's it, the negotiations are over, and I'm done. I don't think they should continue." But then he adds, "For me, they're over. But my negotiators can still continue these talks and work things out there." The group led by U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance was supposed to achieve technical concessions from Tehran within 60 days that would put an end to its nuclear ambitions. However, these negotiations were progressing slowly and were mainly focused on implementing the Memorandum of Understanding, which Trump today said was over. Those are his words. The mediators in this agreement, Pakistan and Qatar, will almost certainly now be rushing to try to resume work on the negotiation process. However, another player, Israel, interpreted Trump's comments differently. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is deeply skeptical of his diplomatic efforts regarding Iran, may view the US president's comments as an opportunity to continue operations both in Lebanon against Hezbollah and directly against Iran itself. In other words, they have a free hand. But the problem is that on Wednesday, oil prices jumped by more than 6%, almost 6.5%, and stock markets around the world fell. The price of Brent crude oil, the global quality benchmark, rose to almost $79 per barrel. The price increase followed several weeks of decline. As it became clear that the United States and Iran might reach an agreement to reopen the vital Hormuz Strait, through which about 1/5 of the world's oil supply passed before the war. Oil prices, of course, are still significantly below their wartime peaks when the price exceeded $120 per barrel, but their increase may be enough to rekindle concerns about inflation. But why did everything break down again and the parties enter this new phase of the war? Only last month, the US and Iran signed a long-awaited memorandum of understanding under which they agreed to cease hostilities in exchange for reopening the Hormuz Strait and easing some financial restrictions on Iran. It would seem that the path to negotiations has been paved, but the point is that the memorandum itself planted a time bomb, the US stated. The point is that the memorandum itself planted a time bomb. The United States of America stated that new strikes on Iran and the reinstatement of sanctions on the sale of Iranian oil are a response to a series of attacks on merchant ships near the Hormuz Strait. On Tuesday, Iran did indeed fire on 3 merchant ships that were passing through Oman's territorial waters, near the Hormuz Strait, and that's important. But Tehran stated that these ships, which were attacked, violated the terms of the memorandum, as they were supposed to obtain permission to pass through the strait along routes approved by its officials. And they warned against using the route located closer to the coast of Oman. They said that Iran did indeed promise to ensure safe passage for ships in the memorandum, but it did not specify exactly where. And now Tehran is confident that the memorandum actually means that the US has effectively recognized that the only corridor in the Hormuz Strait where ships can pass runs along the coast of Iran. And those who take a different route through the strait, for example, along the coast of Oman, are violators, and Iran has the right to attack them. Even on Tuesday, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps stated that a Qatari oil tanker was attacked while trying to pass through the Hormuz Strait, quote, after repeated warnings were ignored. And all this is being done in order to establish, as they say, a new reality in the strait. Ships must travel only along the Iranian coast, since in the future Iran plans to charge a fee for vessels passing through the Hormuz Strait. And in the Memorandum of Understanding, Iran promises free passage of ships through the Hormuz Strait only for 60 days. What will happen after that is not specified at all. And all the experts pointed out this inaccuracy in the memorandum, but the White House didn't listen. At that point, the goal was simply to stop the fighting by any means and let Trump declare victory. Moreover, Iranian officials seriously fear that the United States of America may use the Memorandum of Understanding to assert its control over the Hormuz Strait, thereby depriving Iran of its most important source of leverage in a future conflict: the real ability to disrupt maritime navigation through the Hormuz Strait. The Iranians fear that if the Americans establish a shipping route along the coast of Oman, then in the future it will be the US who will prohibit ships from passing along the Iranian coast. Therefore, the parameters of so-called acceptable behavior during a ceasefire without violating the memorandum remain quite broad. Well, because no one has set clear rules. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps believes it can attack ships in the sovereign waters of other countries. The United States believes it can carry out punitive bombings on a fairly wide range of targets throughout Iran. And Iran thinks that in response, it can simply bomb Bahrain and Kuwait. Well, that's exactly what happens, as we can see. As a result, according to the KPLR data, the movement of oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz has almost completely stopped. Today, only 4 tankers have passed through the strait. The rest have started turning around and, as they say, going to anchor. Meanwhile, this tangle of threats keeps getting more complicated, and the Iranians are threatening the US in response to Trump's threats to attack Iran even harder, especially to seize Khark Island. Today, Ibrahim Rezai, the press secretary of the Committee on National Security and Foreign Policy of the Iranian parliament, stated, and I quote, "Come, we are waiting for you and we promise that not a single American soldier will return alive." And the former Iranian Foreign Minister Ali Akbar Velayati stated that Iran had previously warned, and I quote, "warned that the region is not a place for political gambling by small states, and that Iran is ready to pull the trigger to cleanse the region." In response, Trump stated that he is ready to play games with Iran. Trump stated that his new assessment of Iranian leaders as scum and cuckoos, that's what he called them today, came after he got to know these officials better. In other words, before this, he didn't understand them, but now he does. He stated that he still considers the Iranian leadership more reasonable than the previous leadership, but added that there is still no point in having a dialogue with them. Here is his quote. I've gotten to know them. I think they act much more rationally than those on the first and second levels. The first level has been eliminated, the second has been eliminated, this is already the third level. I think they act more rationally, but judging by their actions over the past week or two, they haven't been doing anything useful for people. I'm not sure I want to make a deal with them. We can play games, but I'm not sure I want that. In short, it's unclear what Trump wants. In response, Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Kazem Garibabadi called Trump a bloodthirsty criminal. Quote, Trump, a criminal and murderer, should be spoken to in a language he understands, namely, apparently, the language of force. In general, as you can see, both sides exchange such courtesies, but by the end of today, Donald Trump suddenly stated that, in his opinion, the war with Iran will not resume. Quote, I don't think the war will resume. I think everything will happen very quickly. They hit a couple of ships, so we struck back much harder in response. When they strike, we strike back 10 times harder. You understand? We hit them much harder than they hit us. We're speaking their language. I think that whatever happens will end very quickly, and we will just make it safer, including for oil. Oil will become very free, very easy and accessible, and it will happen very quickly. What that meant, well, you can figure it out for yourselves. Meanwhile, while it seems like the war is resuming in the Hormuz Strait, today in the southern Iraqi city of Najaf, a farewell ceremony was held for the slain supreme leader of Iran, that is, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The Iraqi authorities declared Wednesday a national holiday. This is the 5th day of the 6-day state funeral that began in Iran on July 4th. Tehran hopes that these large-scale ceremonies will demonstrate strength and unity amid the ongoing war with the US and Israel. Well, the escalation and exchange of threats seems to have simply become a habit for both sides. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.